Bitcoin, it's opened up this world of possibility where, hey, actually, I can accumulate capital, something that was never possible before because we're talking about very small amounts. You can't save $10 a week and invest that in real estate. You can't save $10 a week and invest that in a stock portfolio. If you don't have a permanent proof of address, if you live in an informal structure where there's no street address, you can't prove your identity, you can't open a bank account, you can't open a stock portfolio. You're basically excluded from the financial system. And if you're excluded from the financial system, the only thing that you have access to is physical cash, and that's a horrible way to try and build a sustainable financial future for yourself and your family. So Bitcoin has really enabled that for the first time in a small way, but in a very, very meaningful way.
Hello, this is the Bitcoin Libertarian. Our guest today is Herman Vivier. Herman is the founder of Bitcoin Ekasi and co-founder of the Surfer Kids, a non-profit that's been transforming lives in South African township of Mossel Bay since 2010 through surfing, skating, education, and now Bitcoin. Bitcoin Ekasi is building a real circular Bitcoin economy in the township. They pay surf coaches and staff entirely with Bitcoin, onboard local merchants to accept sats, and use Bitcoin education to give young people tools for financial sovereignty in one of the toughest economics environment. Inspired by Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, this project shows what hyper-Bitcoinization can look like at grassroots level, not through governments or big institutions, but through community trust. Herman is a long-time Bitcoiner who's been writing and speaking about Bitcoin since early days, and someone who's put his convictions into practice by accepting Bitcoin for his surf business, a rubber surf, as far as 2015. Today, we are going to explore how Bitcoin isn't just digital gold, is a tool for dignity, opportunity, and real freedom in places where the fiat system had failed the most. Herman, welcome.
Cool, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. I remember I interviewed you a couple of years ago with my old YouTube channel that was taken down. So now it's a good time to bring you back to talk about Bitcoin Ekasi. But the first question that I do to you, I already did back then, but the public is new. So the first question is, how were you at a spiel?
How was I orange pilled? I mean, I was orange pilled by necessity. So we needed a way to move money from abroad to South Africa for our tourism business, and we were cut off from our client base due to sanctions. And I'd been reading about this thing called Bitcoin for a while, and I suggested that our clients use that, and they had no idea what it was. And yeah, when I saw that first payment come through, it was just a bit of a light bulb moment, because I realized that there's no way anyone can stop this. You don't need permission, and it was just fantastic.
Yes, totally agree on that. And since then, you become a Bitcoiner and you started with Bitcoin Ekasi. Now, when I remember when I spoke about Bitcoin Ekasi like 2 years ago, you were referred by the guy from Escuelita Bitcoin in Uruguay, Ernesto. And now everyone who I speak about circular economies, they put Bitcoin Ekasi like the model to go, especially in Africa. Tell us about how it started and how it is going.
Yeah, I mean, it started, I don't know, I suppose around the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, started thinking about the idea. And it started very small. We started with one surf coach, earning a small part of his salary in Bitcoin. And we started with, I think, one, maybe two shops. And we kept it like that for the first 4 to 5 months. And then sort of towards the end of 2021, we started posting about it online. And then it just kind of started growing. People became interested. We did some more fundraising in Bitcoin. We employed more coaches. We grew the program. We started paying more salaries in Bitcoin. And today it's almost 5 years later. We employed 10 full-time staff and 11 part-time. The part-time staff we employ are kids that we train ourselves that have been with us for many years. And we pay 100% of all our salaries in Bitcoin. And there's probably 45, maybe 50 businesses that accept Bitcoin as payment. So the idea is that the Bitcoin flows within the circular economy. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot of things that's happened since then and now, but we've just tried to grow it not too quickly, and try to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable and can be kept going for the long run.
What was the reason that why you started with Bitcoin Ekasi, decided to, okay, let's pay to one coach on Bitcoin? What was the reason behind the start of Bitcoin Ekasi?
I mean, so my personal orange pill moment was related to the tourism business that I own with my wife, and that happened way back in 2015. And that's when I really, I mean, I'd been reading about Bitcoin for a few years by then, but that was my first sort of practical experience. And between 2015 and 2020, I read as much as I could. I watched videos. I tried to understand the technology, but I wasn't contributing in any significant way. We were using Bitcoin to run our business, the tourism business, but hardly anyone knew that we were doing that. We didn't advertise that. It was just something that we used only because we needed it. And something changed in 2020. I think the insanity of COVID contributed to me wanting to do more to try and affect some positive change. And I realized that if we, copied the Bitcoin Beach model, we could potentially help accelerate Bitcoin adoption, particularly in Africa. And so that was the main reason, wanting to make a contribution. I wanted to contribute to the adoption of Bitcoin and try and accelerate that. And having seen the success of Bitcoin Beach and realizing that we have the same foundation that we could build a Bitcoin project on top of, it just made sense.
And how was the roadmap since you started first paying to the coaches on Bitcoin, and then you went to try to make the shops affect Bitcoin to create this circular economy?
I mean, I've, I don't know if I'd call it a roadmap. We were kind of improvising as we go, but in hindsight, obviously, I think probably the most important thing to say is that I tried to through education try to get the local community leaders on the ground, people like Lutando, who's our project lead. I try to get them to take the lead and guide the project in their own community. I could do very well by representing the project to the outside world, going to conferences, talking about the project, so on and so forth. But when it came to being a leader in the community, I had to recognize that, we were trying to do something different from what we were doing before. Yes, we had the surf school who were recruiting children from that community for many years. We started that in 2010, but that was different. We were taking the children from the community and bringing them down to the beach, even though it's only 1 kilometer away. I mean, it's very close. We were still taking the children out of the community into a different environment and coaching them surfing. And so we could play a leadership role there as, relative outsiders. But it's a very different thing to try and take Bitcoin into the community. And that's what makes Bitcoin Ekasi different. Even though we are using the platform that we had been building for many years, we were trying to do something very different. So I recognized through this process that it would make sense to have a local leader lead the project in the community, which is a little different from what we had before. But other than that, I mean, we basically improvised, and I guess the most important part of the roadmap was the speed limit. We had to, we had to pull back and sort of try not to grow too quickly. This is something that can very easily run away from one if there's too much attention and too much hype too quickly, and too much growth, because it's not a tech company, it's a community project, and community projects don't scale like tech companies do, I suppose. So we had to be quite careful that we were building in a sustainable way.
And why do you say this? Because in my point of view as an entrepreneur, for me, I want to grow as fast as possible, like as fast as possible. So why for this kind of communities, it's good to not to grow so quickly. And this applies only to Bitcoin Ekasi, or you see to all the circular economies?
I would say it applies to any Bitcoin circular economy project. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the adoption is real. So and that takes time. There's just, I mean, it's just a fundamental reality that people are not going to adopt the new money overnight. It takes time to build up that trust. And so with a community project like this, it's not necessarily profit driven, and it's not reliant on the size of its user base for its measurement of success. The measurement of success in the case of a Bitcoin circular economy is how often does a particular merchant receive a Bitcoin transaction. So if you have 10 merchants on board and every single one of them receives 10 Bitcoin transactions every single day, that's great. If you have 100 merchants on board, but only 10 merchants receive one Bitcoin transaction per day, that's not so great. There's not a very high frequency there. So it can be deceptive in that sense. But, it's like, and I suppose at some point it will start growing very fast. But if that growth is organic, that's fine. Obviously, organic growth that happens very quickly is fine. But it's this thinking that, oh, if I go onboard 100 people in one day, then I've achieved massive success. Well, only if all 100 people that you onboarded keep using it every single day. If you onboard 100 people today, but tomorrow nobody's using it, then that you've not really accomplished anything. So it's a balancing act, I guess.
Yes, because again, so in this, I think that usually organic growth is stronger than exponential growth. Or as you said, probably I can go today and make 100 merchants accepting Bitcoin, but tomorrow nobody knows what is Bitcoin, and this is not a success. And how do you manage the onboarding of the merchants? You go to the shop, explain Bitcoin, you or the people from the community go to the shop, explain the basics of how to accept Bitcoin, and then you do a follow-up on them?
I mean, the follow up is constantly happening. There's always, we actually employ two people to specifically work with the merchants in the community. There's constant follow up necessary. You're dealing with an environment where the general level of education is not very high. So there's a lot of illiteracy. People struggle to read large numbers, and dealing with fractions of a Bitcoin or individual satoshis and conversion rates between Bitcoin and fiat. There's a lot more mathematical skills required than if you're just dealing in regular fiat money. So the support structure necessary to responsibly onboard people is quite a hefty requirement. And that's also one of the reasons why we don't want to scale too quickly, because we have to do fundraising to employ 2 people to work as a support structure for the shops. But those 2 people can realistically only really support a network of, let's say, 50 merchants. If we onboard another 50 merchants, we have to employ 2 more people until we get to a point where you don't need a support structure anymore. But that'll only happen once Bitcoin becomes regular money for normal people. We're not there yet. We're not at that point yet. So yeah. For the most part, I'm not the person doing the support work for the community. I run the project. In fact, we have 2 different projects that overlap, but are very interlinked. It's both the Surfer Kids and Bitcoin Ekasi. And I sort of oversee both of those. And the Surfer Kids contribute towards Bitcoin Ekasi in the sense that we pay the surf coach's salary, the lifeguards, everybody that works for the surf program. We pay all those salaries in Bitcoin. But there's less focus on the Bitcoin adoption there than there is with Bitcoin Ekasi, where we employ a separate group of people to do Bitcoin specific education and the merchants and so on. So I sort of work in an oversight role for both these projects, but the actual support structure in the community for the Bitcoin adoption are people who live in the community. I don't live. I live nearby. It's very close. It takes me 10 minutes to drive there, but I don't live in the community. I'm not from there. So the people who do does that kind of leadership work is from there. They've lived there their whole life. Everybody knows them. So that's kind of that.
And what does the support structure do with the merchants that adopt Bitcoin, and why is quite important now until you said Bitcoin becomes money?
There's people who, for example, use fiat money, and when they transact with fiat money, it's all cash based, so paper cash, not digital. And so they would typically use the pictures on the banknotes to identify the value of the money that they're using. This is just one example, but it give you an idea. And so now if you're switching over to Bitcoin, all of a sudden you can still see the fiat value, but it's displayed numerically. There's no pictures, so for example, let's say our 50 Rand note, I think it's a lion on the 50 Rand. On the 100 Rand, it's a buffalo. On the 20 Rand, it's an elephant. On the 10 Rand, it's a rhino. So they would use these animal pictures to actually understand what value. It's not necessarily reading the numbers, and this doesn't apply to everyone. This is quite an extreme example, but it is a real example. If you're going to switch a person like that over to Bitcoin, you need to almost start at the level where you teach people how to read large numbers. And there the support structure is crucial. Lutando has received messages at 10 o'clock at night from people who are like, hey, come and help me understand how much money I have. I don't understand because it's all numbers on the screen. They're not used to reading numbers on the screen. They're used to looking at physical banknotes with pictures on them. So like I said, that's quite an extreme example, but it just gives a person an idea of the type of intense support that's necessary. And there are many other examples. But if you don't provide that kind of support structure, it's kind of irresponsible to expect people in that type of environment to adopt Bitcoin. You kind of have to do that.
Yes, agree. And why do they put them? They take the money with the picture because they cannot read numbers.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah. Like
yeah.
I said, that doesn't apply to everyone. It's just an example, but yes.
Yes, of course, and if they cannot read the numbers of the currency, if you try to talk about satoshis, especially now that satoshis are measured in thousands, For example, now anything you buy is a couple of thousands of satoshis if you accept Bitcoin. So yeah, that's the reason. And how many merchants are now accepting Bitcoin in the community?
On BTC Map, we have, I think, between 40 and 50 merchants listed. Realistically speaking, I'd say it's about half of them that receive regular payments. And so let's say, 20 to 30 merchants that receive very regular payments. And then there's probably a core group of, let's say, 5 to 10 merchants that have actually seen, I wouldn't say not a majority of their turnover come in the form of Bitcoin, but a significant percentage of their turnover coming in the form of Bitcoin, because that's where the coaches shop most often. Like the coaches have to spend Bitcoin. With the staff that we employ, 10 people. We have 3 or 4 surf coaches, maybe 4 or 5 surf coaches. We have a couple of lifeguards. We've got the teachers, cooks, cleaners. All these people have to spend Bitcoin because they don't receive any fiat as a salary, and they tend to shop at specific locations for their groceries. They don't visit all the merchants equally frequently. Obviously, there's some merchants are. And so that core group of merchants, probably, I'd say 5 to 10 are heavily invested, and would actually receive, multiple, maybe dozens of Bitcoin transactions per day. So it's pretty small. And the idea is to kind of keep it small because that makes sure that it's sustainable. It's not, we can't afford to employ 100 people, and I don't want to employ 100 people. Because I don't want to do fundraising to cover a budget that covers 100 people. And if we can't employ 100 people, there's no point having 200 merchants on board, because, with the team of 20, 30 people that do currently, work for us, they can support a merchant network of, let's say, 40 to 50 merchants at most. And that's kind of how it grows until there's much wider adoption, which it's very, very early days. Like, let's be clear,
Yes.
it's very, very early when it comes to organic adoption of people that are not part of a specific Bitcoin project. It's very early days.
Yes, and tell me about the Surfer Kids. What is this project, and how do you integrate with Bitcoin Ekasi?
So the Surfer Kids was started in 2010. My wife and I co-founded that the same year we started our tourism business. It was through the tourism business that we were introduced to Bitcoin in 2015. But we operated the Surfer Kids in the tourism business at the same time since then. And it was the Surfer Kids, we have a group of about 40 to maybe 45 kids that attend our surf school every day, 5 days a week, all year round. So it's a very busy program. We employ several coaches. We recruit the kids from age 6 onwards. So we recruit the kids very young. The idea is to teach them to become good surfers. So to be able to learn surfing at an advanced level, not necessarily professional, but to an extent where they can say they've learned a difficult skill. So surfing is quite difficult. It's physically quite demanding, and you're also dealing with Mother Nature and the ocean, and so you've got to learn to understand how these natural elements work. You need to be able to predict swell, understand how wind works. You need to understand how all these natural elements work together. So it's not only physically difficult; it's also it's like learning a new language almost, and that takes a long time. I'd say it's about 4 years to learn how to really surf at a high level, maybe a bit longer. And so that's the aim. The aim is to teach the kids to surf really well. The program, We are open 7 days a week, but officially the program runs 5 days a week. And yeah, we employ surf coaches, lifeguards. We cook for the children on a daily basis. We have to provide food. A lot of them don't get proper food at home. Oftentimes the meal they eat at our project is the only meal they get for the day. And so it's quite an intense youth development program. And everybody that works for the Surfer Kids earns their salary in Bitcoin. And that's where Bitcoin Ekasi started. Bitcoin Ekasi started by doing that, by switching the salaries of the Surfer Kids over to Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin Ekasi grew out of that. We kind of realized, okay, if we're going to pay salaries in Bitcoin, we need to provide some education in Bitcoin. If we're going to pay salaries in Bitcoin and onboard merchants, we have to provide some support to the merchants. If we're going to pay salaries in Bitcoin and onboard merchants, then we probably need to develop some of our own tools. So we've started educating on software development and that kind of thing. So Bitcoin Ekasi is it started with paying the Surfer Kids coaches salaries in Bitcoin, but then grew out of that with all the other stuff that becomes necessary once you do that. So it was an organic development, if I could put it that way.
And during the surfer kids, the kids that go only learn how to surf, or you also teach something related to Bitcoin or other kind of skills?
So the way that works is that the Surfer Kids are recruited very young. So we start from age 6, 7, 8 years old. And at that age, there's very little that you can teach about Bitcoin. The children can't read, they can't count, they can't write. You can teach them surfing because it's a physical skill. But the way we start the Bitcoin education at that age is we basically pay them small rewards in Bitcoin. So the kids that come on a regular basis, that have a good attitude, that progress very well, that listen to the coaches, that don't fight with each other. We give them a small pocket money in Bitcoin. We use Bolt cards, so they don't need telephones. They don't have telephones, so we can't rely on phone or mobile wallets. So we use Bolt cards, and then they would go and spend or save those rewards on a monthly basis. And that's the way we start the Bitcoin education with the Surfer Kids when they're very young. As they become older, some of the kids show interest in a higher level education in Bitcoin, and for them, we have a Bitcoin diploma class. But typically we don't recruit for the Bitcoin diploma class until the kids are sort of 12, 13 years old, because we need them to learn how to read and write first at school. We can't do that. We don't have the staff. So we rely on the local school to teach them reading and writing, which, is kind of their job. And then if they learn reading and writing, we can recruit them into the Bitcoin diploma program. Some of the kids do join, some don't. We also recruit for the Bitcoin diploma program outside of the Surfer Kids, so it's not restricted to the Surfer Kids, and anyone from the community can join. But yeah, and we also then have a postgraduate diploma program where once they finish the Bitcoin diploma, they start reading more complex books and texts on Bitcoin. And especially with the development of AI, building an educational program has become not easy, but it's become very possible to become a very effective educator if you, as a teacher, have an AI assistant. Like, without AI, a teacher is limited to what they have in here. With AI, a teacher can basically teach anything. As long as the teacher knows how to use that tool. So that's helped a great deal with building this Bitcoin education program. And we've seen kids that have really excelled, that came from the surfing program, but moved over to the Bitcoin education program. And, they're at a point where they can become developers and really move up in that direction. So yeah, there's an overlap, but it's not exclusive.
I can I never been in South Africa. Of course, never been in Mossel Bay, but for what you tell or what we spoke in the last time I spoke with you, there is a real poor place with a lot of needs. And you said that some kids, they only get their food when they go to the program. How has the Bitcoin circular economy and the surfer kids improved the reality of Mossel Bay?
I mean, I think the biggest improvement for now is on the lives of the coaches and their families. And that's still a very small group of people. But what it's given the coaches is it's given them a way to start thinking about their own future, particularly from the context of financial empowerment. So build up a small pool of capital for your family, save in Bitcoin, and take responsibility for your own financial future, because there is nobody else that's going to come and help you one day when you need to retire. The South African government is not capable of doing that. The social security net, so to speak, in South Africa is almost non-existent. So it's really essential for people to start thinking about their own financial futures. And it's really sad to see that people in poor communities begin to rely on the government and live very, very, very difficult lives as a result. So that's been the biggest benefit, because the coaches that we employ have never really had any other way to think about their own future financial empowerment. It's like living day to day. I earn the money today, I spend the money tomorrow. I earn the money today, I spend the money tomorrow. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's opened up this world of possibility where, hey, actually, I can accumulate capital. Something that was never possible before, because we're talking about very small amounts. You can't save $10 a week and invest that in real estate. You can't save $10 a week and invest that in a stock portfolio. If you don't have a permanent proof of address, if you live in an informal structure where there's no street address, you can't prove your identity, you can't open a bank account, you can't open a stock port. There's just, you're basically excluded from the financial system. And if you're excluded from the financial system, the only thing that you have access to is physical cash. And that's a horrible way to try and build a sustainable financial future for yourself and your family. So Bitcoin has really enabled that for the first time, in a small way, but in a very, very meaningful way.
That's what how Bitcoin. I always repeat on that. Bitcoin give you access to a property with just $5-10, something that you cannot
Yeah,
do on real estate. You cannot do,
exactly.
even, for example, people in Argentina that live in a house, have an ID, proof of address, cannot access to, for example, invest in strategy or Tesla or whatever. You need, I don't know, 400 for strategy, 100 something US dollar for one stock. For Tesla, almost $400 for one stock. So it requires a lot of money to invest. But if you just save $10 a month with Bitcoin and repeat it constantly, time to time, with the time, in 5-4 years, you're going to have a lot of money saved. That otherwise, if you save cash, your purchase power is totally dilute. And talking about that, how do you help people and or the supporters, the support team? How do you help handling the volatility? Because volatility is something that if you have cash to like go the long term is not a problem, but if you need to spend day by day, is a problem.
Um, I mean, the primary tool we use for that is a feature that's built into the Blink wallet called StableSats. So Blink wallet used to be the Bitcoin Beach wallet, developed by Galloway. It then separated into its own company. Blink is an independent company. They operate a custodial Bitcoin wallet. For the time being, I think they're still based in El Salvador, but they operate globally. And they've got this feature in the wallet called stable sats. And that is the primary wallet that our staff use to receive their salaries and to spend the money that they need to spend. And so it's entirely up to them whether they want to use that feature. But if they do use that feature, then volatility is not a problem because Blink ties your Bitcoin value to a fiat value. And so it's quite easy to avoid. And obviously, we just adjust the salary amounts according to the fiat exchange rate. So if the fiat exchange rate changes, then the amount of Bitcoin that coaches receive will also change. We don't denominate our salary amounts in Bitcoin. That would be unfair towards the coaches because all the shops where they go and spend their sats still denominate their prices in fiat. So that being said, there are some things that we do denominate in Bitcoin, but these are what we call non-critical components. I mentioned that we give pocket money to the kids earlier. That pocket money is denominated in Bitcoin. So the kids will receive a certain amount of sats per week. There's a few other similar components to the project that are non-critical that we also denominate in sats. And we're constantly trying to push more of our operations to be denominated in sats rather than rands. But obviously that's a very slow and delicate process precisely because of volatility. And salaries, you cannot realistically denominate salaries in Bitcoin as long as merchants are denominating their prices in fiat. That's just not going to be fair. Unless you could guarantee volatility only to the upside. But obviously, that's not going to happen. So, yeah. So for now, that's basically how we handle that. And then obviously we encourage savings, at which point, the sats get moved from Blink to the coach's long-term savings wallets, which is all self-custody hardware wallets. We use a variety of different solutions there. And the coaches are educated to understand that if they do go over to saving in Bitcoin, it's a long-term decision. They should be willing to accept that risk of volatility. But that involves a lot of education.
Yeah, of course. Accepting the volatility involves a lot of education and living yourself through the bear market. Like when it happens you the first time and you see Bitcoin falling, you are crazy. Now, happening now is for us is another day at the office. We know that it's the only preoccupation that I have now is I don't have more money to buy Bitcoin because at these prices is super cheap. And talking about in general in Africa, Bitcoin Ekasi has become like a lighthouse for all the African circular economies. How do you see the environment now? How do you see the projects that are going? Do you see that they are in the right direction?
Yes, for the most part. For the most part, I think there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of enthusiasm, which is great. I love to see the development of these projects across the continent. I think there's good reason for the excitement in Africa. Africa has a very fragmented currency system, so it's incredibly difficult to move money across borders in Africa, and that's more so than in most other regions. It's a continent with 42 different fiat currencies. There's very low liquidity between those two different currencies at various points. It's very, very difficult to move money across the continent. So it's great to see that people are enthusiastic about a solution that addresses that. And I mean, I like the excitement, but it is, again, one has to be careful not to get overexcited. And that's the that's the kind of the thing that I try and warn against most often. It's to build slowly and methodically, and to try and build for the long term. It's better to onboard one merchant and focus on education than to onboard 20 merchants and 2 weeks later they're angry with you because nobody understands what you got them into. So that is a challenge that we deal with, and it's understandable. It's completely normal that when people get into something for the first time, they become excited about it, and sometimes a little too excited, and that's totally fine. And we do see some of that. That's very realistic to expect that. But I'm very excited to see this. I think it's great. There's a lot of really good projects on the continent that are doing really good work. And I think if you can get Bitcoin into this kind of environment, it really demonstrates where it can solve the biggest problems, so to speak. I'm convinced that Africa is by far one of the most exciting places for Bitcoin adoption at the moment. Not only in Africa, but I think wherever you see really big problems, and Africa is one of those places.
Yes, of course. On a conference I attend in Argentina, Lunatic Coin, one of the biggest podcasters in Spanish, he said that the big problem for Bitcoin would be if all the countries are Switzerland. Because if all the countries
Exactly.
are Switzerland, we don't need Bitcoin. But in Africa, the other day, I had a podcast with Ivan Caleja. I'm sure you know him. He's from Bitcoin
Yes.
for Humanity. And
Yeah.
he was telling me that even inside countries, it's difficult to move money from one region to the other region. So that's why in Africa, if they don't use Bitcoin, they cannot even work or do commerce. And talking about Ekasi towards these communities, are you giving them help, like acting like the Bitcoin beach for all the African communities?
I mean, I don't like to necessarily think about it that way, but yes, we are trying to provide some guidance. I guess the most important thing that we try to do is to try and provide guidance by building a solid example. So I'd like people to look at Bitcoin Ekasi and go, it's not about giving advice. It's more about showing people, okay, this is what we've built. We've tried to build it in a way that it really works. It is working at the moment. It's working really well. And so it's just a good example. That's the way I look at it. It's not like we have created the blueprint for everyone to follow. It's just there are other ways to do it, but this is a great example, and that's how I'd like people to think about it. And we do obviously try and be responsible, um, for that, but it's a very loose sort of responsibility. We're not the leaders on the continent in any way. Um, not in any official way, obviously. But we provide support wherever we can. I mean, for example, we saw one of the things that we started doing very early on was these bolt cards, because we try to figure out a way how can you give Bitcoin to somebody who doesn't have a phone. So if you have these programmable bolt cards that work with NFC technology, then as long as the merchant has a phone that has NFC capability, you're going to be able to pay in Bitcoin. And so we started rolling out these bolt cards, and it worked really well for us. And so we started helping other projects to set up this as well. So now there's over 15 projects on the continent that have a similar bolt card. So in that sense, we try and build things that can work in other places too. Um, we try and share ideas. We don't keep what we build to ourselves. So yeah, in that way we try. And I mean, we have a conference that we help organize every year. It's one of the very few conferences on the African continent that's Bitcoin only. There's a lot of crypto nonsense here, but in terms of Bitcoin only content, the conference that we do in Cape Town every year is one of only 2 or 3 on the continent, which is not many. And we try and invite as many of these projects as we can, and we support them to get to the conference. Um, because that's a great place to learn. You can exchange ideas a lot faster and grow a lot quicker personally in your understanding. So yeah, we try and support as much as we can.
Excellent. And the conference is adopting Bitcoin, right, in South Africa?
Yeah, adopting
And
Bitcoin
and
Cape Town.
and what is when was already this year or is coming?
This year it's already been. We did the conference in January. So we did our third conference in January 2025. And for next year, the dates are set for February 2020. We did our third conference in January 2026. And the fourth conference, the fourth Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town, is set for February 2027. So we've booked the dates and booked the venue. And I think the dates are 2026, 27 February, 2027.
Excellent. And how does this conference help to the African ecosystem?
I mean, it gets people to exchange ideas on a in an environment where they can learn a lot faster. That personal connection. I'm a big believer in forming personal connections by meeting people in real life. It's one thing. It's very useful to be able to connect over the internet, like we are doing now. But if you have 10 online meetings and one physical meeting, that one physical meeting can really, help to just solidify things. And so, I mean, for example, this year at the Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town conference, we did a Bitcoin Circular Economy Summit where we had 24 circular economy projects from across the continent all come together and share what they are building, where they're building it, how they're building it, and so on and so forth. And it was great. A lot of these people don't get invited to other conferences. It's not the most exciting component of a normal Bitcoin conference. The big speakers are the big speakers, and they're the ones that draw the ticket sales. So it's very rare to see the Bitcoin circular economy conversation happen at a big conference, and so we try and give those projects a platform, because I think Bitcoin circular economies are one of the most important, not the only. Obviously, there are many important things happening in Bitcoin, but I think circular economies fulfill a very important role in the wider ecosystem as a proof of concept demonstration. It is so valuable to be able to take someone and show them, hey, you can actually use Bitcoin in real life, and there's people living on Bitcoin today. And they're doing it in real life, in their own community, buying regular things, living normal lives, and they're just using Bitcoin as everyday money. And it's a very powerful demonstration. I've seen non-Bitcoiners, I've seen confused crypto people, I've seen all kinds of people come and visit the project, and they leave with a totally different understanding, where they're like, okay, now I see what it is that you're trying to do. I have a better understanding of this Bitcoin thing than I had before, way better. And it's a fantastic entry point. Like if you have somebody who is maybe a little skeptical or very skeptical, but don't understand much about Bitcoin, the best thing that you could do is take them to a circular economy and just walk around, just let's have a coffee here, let's get some food there, and you're just, paying for everyday things in Bitcoin. It's a great way to get them educated and more on board.
Yes, and I think that these conferences are really helpful because, as you said, probably in other Bitcoin conferences, there is no room for circular economies. For
Yes.
example, if you go to the big Bitcoin conference in Vegas, or even in Lugano, or even in the one in Buenos Aires, there was not so focused on the circular economy. I think that if you can gather together 20, 26 projects and they can exchange information and examples, is really good for them. And also I heard that after the conference, there was some organization that went to visit circular economies across Africa and pay everything with Bitcoin.
Yeah. So we helped to make that happen. We arranged a road trip, and we visited a bunch of different projects. For now, it was just in South Africa. We visited six different circular economies in South Africa after the conference. So it was a 5-day road trip. We will be doing another one later this year. That's a little longer. It'll be 10 days, and it won't be tied to the conference. It'll be an independent thing. And the idea is to encourage people to come and experience circular economies, and do it in a way that's really fun. Like, you do lots of really fun things, lots of adventure tourism. There's surfing, there's skydiving, there's all the exciting things. But at the same time, you pay for everything in Bitcoin. And so far, we've only done one that is in South Africa. We are working on a version that is a trip through Africa that visits several different African countries. But that's something that we haven't finalized yet. But I think that I would highly encourage anybody to just get to a circular economy, or even if it's not a circular economy, even if just your local meetup, your local meetup where you can pay stuff in Bitcoin. Once you've made that first real life transaction of Bitcoin, things are very different.
Yes, I always say that when I, for example, now I'm traveling. I'm in Bangkok in Thailand, and I've been a couple of days looking for shops that accept Bitcoin to buy something on Bitcoin, but I haven't found yet. I'm sure that there are, but I haven't found. But yeah, every time I travel, I try to go, okay, where I can buy something with Bitcoin, a coffee, an ice cream, or food. Or when I go to the conference, of course, I try to go to the shops that accept Bitcoin. And talking about South Africa, how is the situation with Bitcoin in South Africa?
I mean, I think it's very interesting here. I mean, we have several circular economy projects that are doing really good work, like Solid. There's a town that's about 2 hours away from where we are in Mossel Bay, called Bitcoin Witstrand, where I think it's one of the highest per capita adoption rates in the world. It's a very, very small town, but they've literally onboarded half the town to Bitcoin. And there's only, I think it's 700 permanent residents. So, if you've onboarded half the town, it doesn't take that much. But they've done fantastic work. And there's another town that's 2 hours in the other direction that's done the same thing. And then there's another one in that direction that's done the same thing, where you can go and you can do almost everything you want to do in Bitcoin. So there's several circular economy projects that are doing very solid work. And then we also have companies that have made it possible to pay almost everything in Bitcoin. So I don't spend any fiat when I fill up my car. I pay all my diesel and petrol. Hopefully we have diesel and petrol for the long term, with the situation being what it is. but like, I go to the pharmacy and I buy all my prescription medication in Bitcoin. I go to the supermarket, hardware store. We have companies in South Africa that have made Bitcoin payments possible almost anyway. Like, the only reason I still have a bank account is because when I travel, I need visas to go to most places. I can't, like, if I want to go to Europe, I have to apply for a visa. If I go to America, I've got to apply for a visa. There's very few places I can go without a visa. And for those visa applications, I have to have a proof of funds. And the only proof of funds that the consulates and embassies accept is a formal South African bank account. So I have to maintain a bank account if I want to travel. But other than that, if it wasn't for that, I don't earn any income in fiat. I earn all my income through our tourism business in Bitcoin, and I don't have to I don't have to convert anything to fiat if it wasn't for this travel complication. I could literally cover all my. I mean, I even pay my municipality bill. I buy electricity in Bitcoin. And this is all made possible by very exciting companies like Money Badger. They've done fantastic work to make it possible to really live on Bitcoin, no matter where you are in the country.
Yes, I saw many projects in Africa that they help people living in Bitcoin. In South America and in America, we have Bull Bitcoin, but I interview a couple of people that they make possible to live in Bitcoin. And talking about Ekasi again, how do you envision the future? What are the plans for the future?
I mean, sort of short-term future, something we're working on at the moment is we have a big construction project that we are hopefully going to start next year, and we're going to build a new Ekasi center, which is hopefully going to become a hub for these types of projects, a African hub and a global hub, and we'll be able to host people, we'll be able to host events, we'll be able to really professionalize our education system. We've been working in a very temporary location for the last four years, and we've been working on this permanent solution for almost 2 years now. It's a very slow process. We're dealing with the local government to try and get the property for as cheap as possible, but that's something that we'll hopefully be able to start early next year and hopefully complete before the end of 2027. Definitely before the end of 2028. So that's the sort of short term future. Long term, the future, I would say for any circular economy project is to work towards a point where the circular economy is not the project. So the project is the instigator and the catalyst, but ultimately the circular economy is the network between the businesses. And so a circular economy project itself has to think in a business-like way to try and encourage the development of businesses, start new businesses, educate people to become business people themselves, build the local businesses in the community, and encourage the network of businesses to use Bitcoin. And that's the long term vision I have for Bitcoin Ekasi, where it's not like at the moment, Bitcoin Ekasi is a specific project. We do Bitcoin education, we do that, we support the merchants. But long term, I would like when people come and visit Bitcoin Ekasi, they should be able to visit Bitcoin Ekasi without ever interacting with the project. They simply come and visit Bitcoin Ekasi, but what they're really visiting is a network of businesses, and all those businesses are using Bitcoin, and that's all it is really. The businesses themselves become the educators. This is something that they've managed to do in other circular economies in South Africa already, where you're dealing with a sort of a higher level of socioeconomic development, where the businesses themselves become the educators and onboard other businesses. And that's kind of what I think we should be working towards.
Excellent. And remind me, what does Ekasi mean? Because I remember that has a meaning, a really nice meaning connected with the project. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting. The word Ekasi refers to the old apartheid regime, where there was this law called the Group Areas Act, and this law forced people who were not white to live outside the city center. So the city center was reserved for whites only, and this is where all the economic development was happening. And as a non-white person, you could work in the city center, but you were not allowed to live there. So there was a certain cut-off time during the day where people who did not have permission, so non-whites who did not have permission to live in the city center, would have to go back to the location where they stayed. And the Afrikaans word for location is locasie. It comes from Dutch. Afrikaans is mostly based on Dutch. And so that word locasie was then shortened into Ekasi, by the people who lived in that location themselves. So they use the word to refer to their own neighborhood, but in a kind of a positive way. It's become a positive word for that type of area. It's not an Ekasi is not a specific location. You can refer to any part of South Africa that during apartheid was reserved for non-whites. You can call any area an Ekasi. So it's not like our neighborhood is the Ekasi. Our neighborhood is one of many Ekasis in South Africa. But that's where the word comes from.
Excellent. And to finish the interview, I have two more questions. The first one, how do you see the future of Bitcoin?
I see the future of Bitcoin almost. I mean, I don't like using the word inevitable. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I kept quiet between 2015 and 2020. It was difficult for me to imagine that it's inevitable, but because I'm very, very skeptical. But I think we've gotten to a point where I would be very surprised if this does not play a major role in the global economy going forward. I think we're way past the point where it's not going to become a thing. There are risks, there are challenges, obviously, but it's become so widespread. It's still very early, but it's become widespread enough that governments are talking about it. People are taking notice, and you can't ignore it anymore. You can choose not to participate, but you really cannot ignore it. That was not true in 2013 or 2015. There was serious risks. With the block size wars, things could have gone a very different direction. It's not a foregone conclusion that things worked out for the best. But I think today, I still don't like the idea of saying it's a foregone conclusion, but it's very close to a foregone conclusion. And I'm particularly surprised by the lack of serious volatility the last sort of month and a half with the stuff that's been happening in the Middle East. I would have expected under normal circumstances to see a lot more volatility. And I think it just shows how mature it's become. And I mean the payments technology on the payment side of things, we have to use Bitcoin as a payment technology if we want it to be money. And on the payment side of things, there's been so much evolution that I'm just really excited. I think we're close to a point where you could say there are probably millions of people around the world for who Bitcoin is already everyday money. And that is an amazing thing to be able to say. So I think it's going to be a long road going forward. I don't think this is a short-term thing, 10, 15 years. I could be wrong, but that's just my feeling. But I think it's almost at the point where there's just no way it's not going to happen.
And the last question, if you had the chance to sit down with Satoshi Nakamoto, what would you ask him, her, or them?
Yeah, man, that's a tough question. Yeah, I would just ask them. I mean, look, that's assuming that they're still alive, right? If Satoshi is dead, then I guess the question is sort of very hypothetical. But assuming that Satoshi is still alive, I'd like to know how on earth they've managed to keep quiet, because that to me is a superhuman ability. If Satoshi is still alive today and they're sitting on the private keys, or even maybe they destroyed the private keys long ago, but even then, how do you keep quiet? Like how did they manage not? Because that's such a basic part of human nature. Like it's such a basic part of human nature to want to take credit. Everybody does. I did this, I did that, I did that. It's all about me, 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 me. That's just human nature. And for Satoshi to be able to create this thing and keep quiet, that's just that's incredible. I mean, if they're no longer alive, then that kind of answers the question. But let's assume they are alive. That's what I would ask them.
Excellent. So, Herman, thank you very much for your time. Anything else you want to add and how people can contact you?
Yeah, I mean, I would just repeat what I said earlier is that I don't think it's so much about us. I think the one thing I would add is if you can, try and find a circular economy project close to you, try and find a meetup. I think the biggest takeaway for me from the past sort of, 10, 15 years, whatever it's been, I think the biggest takeaway is we have to meet up in person, and to make Bitcoin real, it's got to be brought into the real world. And the real world is real human connection. And that human connection happens at meetups, it happens at conferences. But for me personally, more than anywhere else, it happened in circular economies where people are earning, spending, and saving in Bitcoin. So if you can try and get to a circular economy, it'll really make this thing real.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And next time, if I meet you in a conference, I will stop and say hi.
Absolutely, man. Be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone who is on the other side. If you like the episode, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, follow our guest as well, because doing so, you help us a lot to paint the world orange. Share this episode with the people you love. Share this episode with the people you hate, because we must reach 8 billion people and give them the orange pill. See you in the next episode. Stay humble, stack sats, and remember, we are all Satoshi.